demands all to shed their last drop of blood in its defense. The old, the young, the weak.
This is true. This is all that's left of the mighty German army.
They stand for Germany. They die for Germany. Building by building, room by room, one rat at a time.
This armband, this is a real armband that the Volkssturm units actually had. And these guys are not regular German army. These guys are civilians. And the Volkssturm, who the Volkssturm basically are, is they're a civilian militia that was created by Hitler. I think it was like September or October 1944. It was like in fall 1944 when it was created. And what the Volkssturm basically was, it was civilians that were previously not eligible to serve that were being drafted because Germany was getting desperate and they were drafting basically every single person they could. And by 1945, they started drafting girls as well. So early 1945, women started getting drafted as well. So in the Battle of Berlin, you would have also seen women Volkssturm units shooting at the Soviet soldiers. But the mod doesn't have that. But you do see male Volkssturm units. But about the Volkssturm is they were the weakest German infantry unit of the war, and primarily because they were civilians. They were people who never saw any kind of combat, and they had barely any training. Maybe it was like a week or two of training, and that was it. And so they might have been trained one day, and the next day they would have been sent out to battle. That's what the Volkssturm units were. And the Volkssturm, they were made up of young people, Hitler Youth and such, that were maybe 15, 16 years old, so kids, teenagers. And you also had really old men, so old men, people in their 60s and their 70s. And some of these guys did have some combat experience. They were previously World War I veterans, but by the time World War II, combat had actually changed a lot since World War I. And these guys were also old. They weren't in a state to fight. And then you also had people that had injuries. They might have been crippled from some kind of injury earlier in the war, and they and now they're being drafted to fight. So the Volkssturm units were units that got wiped out pretty quickly, and they were also very ill-equipped. You even had old women that were drafted into the Volkssturm later on, and and one of the signature weapons of the Volkssturm is the Panzerfaust, which was a disposable German rocket launcher. It was a cheap rocket, shaped charge from a rocket launcher that the Germans would fire, and the Volkssturm units were trained a lot in that, and they were trained to get as close to the Soviet and American tanks as possible and just detonate them. And the Volkssturm units were not expected to survive in those Panzerfaust units because they got so close to enemy armor. These guys are civilians. A lot of these guys that are in these units, and so these guys are civilians that they probably didn't do anything bad. They were just regular civilians that had been, drafted in the last few weeks of the war, and forced against their will. And, Reznov is and the thing is, Reznov is saying, no mercy was shown to my comrades in Stalingrad. But the people that committed those horrible war crimes in Stalingrad, that was the 6th Army. And the 6th Army was wiped out. They were wiped out, they were either killed in battle or they were sent to work camps afterwards. These guys were not part of the 6th Army, these Volkssturm units. These were units that were probably too young. They were probably kids at the time that Stalingrad actually happened. And so these were not the guys that were committing, war crimes in Stalingrad. These were just civilians, and Reznov was just taking it out on them. I'm not defending Germany during World War II. The only thing I'm saying is that these guys were basically civilians. They were civilians that were drafted in the last few weeks of the war. They probably didn't do anything bad. They were just regular people that were just living their lives, and they were just forced into the German army in the last few weeks. They had no choice. If you disobeyed that, if you did not, participate in the Volkssturm, you'd be hanged. And what they would do is they would hang you from a street lantern, and they would put a sign on you saying "coward," hanged for being a coward.